you, man. How you doing?
I'm good.
You got the cameras out.
So far, it's been a slow start to the year, but you can't break me.
A hard hit line drive into right field.
So my year this year, I know a lot of people got a lot to say about it. Whatever. It's my career. I got to make sure that I'm good.
After the game, I was called into the manager's office. It's definitely a moment I won't forget.
Hey, I'm Connor McKnight, and you are listening and watching to Road to the Raid, a podcast here on 𝗂cie_HSN about player development for the White Sox. We talk to players, we talk to coaches, and maybe most importantly, yeah, I said it, most importantly, we talk to Yiannis, the director of player development for the White Sox. He's the man who runs the program that gets White Sox minor leaguers better and into the bigs. The White Sox have been seeing the fruits of that labor with guys like Braden Montgomery, 𝗪cie𝗰𝗶𝗹 and 𝗕𝗏 and Kyle Teel and Grant Taylor, and the list goes on and on. So now that the draft is done, and now that the trade deadline is over and the White Sox have brought in new prospects, Yiannis has had a lot of work to do with him and the rest of his staff in getting these players on the same page as the White Sox front office and the organization and into the fold. So without any further ado, here is a talk with Yiannis, Director of Player Development for the Chicago White Sox, here on Road to the Raid. So welcome back to the podcast, Yiannis, Director of Player Development for the White Sox. Your Road to the Raid podcast is really taking off. We're getting downloaded all over the place. A lot of downloads in Poland, actually, here lately, which I'm really pleased about. Love to be on that good side of Eastern Europe. You have been really, really busy. We were just talking before we started here. This is probably your busiest time of the year. We'll get into the trades and how you bring in new players and everything like that. But you guys have wrapped up the draft, taking Billy Carlson with your first overall pick and going down the line with a lot of good young high school players, some interesting college guys. When did you get involved in draft strategy? You know, when does your role get pulled into that side of things? And what sort of traits, personalities, what sort of things are you looking for and going like, yeah, this guy's on the list as we get closer and closer to draft time?
Yeah, it's the leading up to the draft, you know, the week prior, I get to go to Chicago and, you know, we have obviously Mike Shirley in the scouting department, amateur scouting department is present and spend a lot of time talking about players, high school, college, et cetera, across the country. And it's the whole gamut. You know, our department does such a good job with the background and like knowing who the player is to what degree you can. Right. And so we go through all of that entire week. And so, you know, in collaboration with, you know, the R&D department and trying to focus on some of the skill sets that we value, that we feel like over the course of time can really equate to, you know, good players, pitchers, position players, whatever the case is. And so that's leading up to the draft. And then, you know, we get into the draft and the actual draft day. And it's honestly, it's been one of my favorite things throughout the year, both last year and this year, to be able to be in that room, you know, having the college coaching background and knowing, you know, a lot of the college coaches that these players come from, also, you know, being able to help do some of the, you know, get to know the player a little bit more via the college coach, I think is helpful. And, but at the end of the day, getting to be in the draft room when, you know, the players' names get announced and getting to see some of the reactions of the players, you know, not just in our organization, obviously a lot of that's televised now, but it's just such a cool time for those players that are, you know, embarking on a pro career. And we joke about it. We like, little do they know what they're getting into. Right. But, it's, you know, so leading up to the draft, that's kind of my role. I'm on site and obviously we contribute and we definitely do a lot of talking about some of our players that we have. And, you know, the scouts have questions about, you know, how's so-and-so doing? And, you know, like, for example, this year, one of our topics is Sam Antonacci, right? You know, in his first full season, he's having a really good year. You know, some of the things that we highlight with him is, you know, his competitive will, you know, and how hard he plays the game. And, you know, you talk about identity and that kind of thing. And that's kind of what we're trying to promote on the development side. So, you know, all of that stuff goes into the draft process, but I've really gotten to where I enjoy it. And again, at the end of the day, we get so much background on the players that it's just really helpful to have an idea what, you know, what we're bringing in.
It's really cool to hear you and the organization have that kind of feedback from the dev standpoint, the scouting standpoint, the analytics standpoint, and just have an opportunity like pre-draft process to be able to do some feedback there, right? I would imagine some of these scouts are checking in on Sam Antonacci, not just because they like the guy and got to know him in the scouting process, but also I'm sure that you had this, that, or the other tweak for them, or hey, just keep doing what you're doing here, and this needs a little change. And a scout can check in and go, how did it work for you? Did it sound like, did I give you the right stuff on how to make this player better as we scouted him in, right?
That's 100%. And, I give Chris a ton of credit, number one, but and Mike Shirley and his department, because, the collaboration piece between development and, player acquisition, amateur draft, I think is important. And exactly what you highlighted, being able to talk through, what's going well and maybe more importantly, what's not, and how to try to maybe avoid some of those things in the future, and really trying to focus on, hey, look, these are some of the things that we feel like we can really influence and make better. And these are some of the things that, hey, man, it's really tough to get over this speed bump. So let's just try to avoid that moving forward. And you're right. The scouts, they put so much work in, Connor. It's really hard to quantify, how much work they put in on the front end, and then also how much they follow these players once they're in the organization and root for them. It's just a cool dynamic that a lot of people that watch, the major league games on TV don't probably appreciate. But, I tell you what, it's really fun to be a part of.
Well, you guys have been able to scout pretty well here over the last few years, for sure. I think those of us who kind of analyze your draft classes and kind of go through are going to be looking at the area code rosters for next year and trying to find out which guy you're taking from the area code. I love that. I love that you want geographical dominance when it comes to prospects. I think that's great. But what are some of the things that, maybe there's not a moment where Paul Yiannis has, stood on the table and said, we got to take this guy because this trait and this thing or whatever. But what are some of the, like the soft traits, the leadership qualities that you think must be present in a White Sox draft pick these days?
Yeah, I just think that, we obviously talked about Sam, but I could name a bunch of people. There's been a lot of, the Birmingham team's obviously playing well, and, those guys are coming up through the organization, some of whom were drafted, even last year, like with Sam and Braden Montgomery. But I think that, again, when you talk about identity, and this is, what I shared with some of our draft guys from this year in the room, and you start baking it into the database, you really want to be competitive. You want guys that are relentless, right? And it's easy to say. And, I do think that when we talk about the draft and you talk about, conveying that narrative to scouts and the whole group, you value it to the degree that, like, that, hey, look, we want them to be talented, and that's obviously a prereq, but like, the difference maker and the, like, getting over the hump, so to speak, is, in my opinion, is still going to be, the want to and the grit, whatever you want to say. And so that's the one thing that I would highlight. We need to get players that can run fast and throw hard and all that stuff. But you really, the mental toll that this game can take on both a position player and a pitcher, for that matter, is as great as it's ever been. And so I just think that when, what we're trying to accomplish is not an easy thing. And I think the more that you can share that with the players and say, hey, look, we're here to love you and we're here to make you better. But at the end of the day, like, we need to call Chris and say, hey, man, I'm telling you, I trust that this guy's going to show up and he's going to run through a wall for you. And to accomplish that's hard. And I think it's important to make sure that they know that.
When, it's funny that there are so many. Every baseball player, regardless of what level you guys got to, has a couple of similar stories, right? And I think, to a man, everybody who's played in the big league level had a roommate, a teammate, somebody that they ran into along the way in minor league baseball who they would swear up and down was the most talented player they ever saw, but never made it to the bigs for this, that, or the other reason, right? And I'm not talking about injuries. I'm talking about, like you said, a want to, or a, how do you do this, or how do you do that? How do you get out of your own headspace? How do you, stop, being Deion Sanders without the talent, that kind of thing, right? This kind of look, this kind of feel, right? And it's just funny how many of those stories there are, and inevitably you will have them. The White Sox will have one in their own. This just happens in baseball. It's how this works. And yet, that drive that you guys have to push players into those places of being ultra competitive, it can't stop, right? I mean, this just has to be the work. Yeah.
And, we kind of make light of it because we affectionately say, like, it's not for everybody. Right. And again, like I talk to our players a lot about, like, my own kids, right? I've got 7th and 8th grade boys and 4th grade girl. And, we love them and we want them all to make it to the big leagues. But the fact of the matter is that that's not the case. So yeah, it's a hard game. And again, I think it's important that they know that, because talking about the guys that we took, right? Like we took, 3 out of our first 4 picks were high school guys, right? And the narrative and the discussions with those guys initially is going to be different than, Kyle Lodi's, who was drafted out of Georgia Tech and had been to college and those kind of things. So it's not, they're not all the same. And that being said, like we talk about the game being hard and you got to be tough, et cetera. The other thing we really talk about a lot as a group, as a staff, is that they can get better, right? So like I caution guys for, and myself included, check me, like, because, we make these decisions on players and, he can do this or he can't do that. And, whatever the case might be, but man, they dang sure can get better. And, at the end of the day, that's a little bit of our job is to believe in them.
With the draft guys specifically, Paul, I think White Sox fan, and I would love to know this. I don't know the details of this, to be honest. So educate me. What is the checklist that you and your group go through to determine where a new draftee will start his minor league career? What makes you determine, hey, this guy's going to the complex for a couple of weeks, then to Kannapolis, so this guy's good and ready to go, Winston-Salem for you? Like, how do you do that?
Yeah, again, it's not black and white. You kind of try to handle them individually. What I will say is, just as a general rule, the way that the schedule for the rest of the year works, with now we have the bridge camp, the ACL season ends a little bit earlier than what it used to, and there's no short season. So our kind of rule of thumb at this point is like we give the college guys a chance to go out and play for 3 or 4 weeks, and whether it's Kannapolis or Winston, in general, it's going to be Kannapolis. And the high school guys are going to stay here in Arizona the rest of the year, just because it makes sense, honestly. Like, there's just a lot of moving parts. They're getting used to different things, away from home for the first time, all that stuff. And then fast forward to next spring training, we'll have that decision again, right? Like, if, are we going to send guys to Kannapolis to start the year? Or are we going to keep them here in Arizona to, kind of get their feet under them just a little bit more? And, there's variables to making those decisions, but the initial one relative to this year is mostly like, hey, look, we'll send those college guys out, get them a few weeks at the affiliate, and, hopefully give them a little springboard into next year.
I want to peel back a little bit onto the Braden Montgomery of this and apply it to this year's draft class, right? Whether that's Billy or Kyle or whoever. I would guess that Braden Montgomery's initial assignment, you guys kind of figured would be a couple of weeks and then move him up, right? Just given where he was and the injury and everything like that. What is it about a player that allows you as a dev department to go, it's a couple of weeks and we'll move him? And maybe, and I'm not saying this was the case for Braden, but maybe you don't even care about the results so much. You just want to see the swing or the mechanics or the delivery or whatever, the pitcher hitter kind of thing. Is that on the table for some of the guys that we've got in the group now?
Yeah, it is. And again, I go back to, it is individual, but when you're talking about promoting guys to different levels, I think there's variables. There's age, right? There's physicality, and ultimately performance, right? Like we're trying to create an environment where, look, the way you get to the next level is you play good, right? And that's ultimately what it comes down to. And again, it's not a vacuum, right? Like there are other things. There's needs, there's injuries that present themselves where guys, maybe the schedule gets expedited a little bit or whatever the case might be. But it's definitely something that I personally take a lot of, I value it, other people's opinion, right? Like I'll ask our staff that's at a particular affiliate, obviously our coordinators, Josh Barfield and I have a lot of those conversations, especially when you start talking about Noah Schultz or Hagen Smith, Braden Montgomery, some of those more high profile guys, like, whether it's fair or not, there's some media and whatnot that is associated with those guys making moves. So, but we do collaborate on those things and try to really honestly value the opinion too, in a lot of cases, of the affiliate staff, because they're there with them every single day. They're in the fight with them. They see what they're like early and that kind of stuff. And, but yeah, it's a group effort.
Let's split these into 2 categories. The guys that just got drafted and some of the prospects like Gage Zeal or Davitt or Peoples or whoever who you just brought into the organization via trade. When and how does the player development group get on these guys about, not like get on them, but like get into and talk with these guys about changes you'd like to see made, swing adjustments, a process at the plate? Like, how do you begin to kind of download those adjustments onto these players, knowing that I would imagine you can't give them all the notes at once, right? I mean, you can't have just one meeting with the guy and then say, all right, get out there and do it. That's like, that's like a golf swing that you're changing all at once. It's impossible.
Right. Yeah, I actually think some of the nuance to that is probably less is more initially, honestly. Like the Gage is the example. Look, man, he's been doing something all year long. He's got a routine. Why don't we just spend some time getting to know what that routine is before we become infatuated with changing it immediately when he's got to make a start in a couple of days for a brand new team and a new uniform. You know what I mean? So I think the biggest piece there is the communication on the front end of saying like, hey, we're going to do a good job getting to know who you are, what you are. And then as we, establish trust with them, start to dose them with how we think it can get better. Right. And it does mean something different for a pitcher and a position player. I do think that, on the pitching side, you can make some more intentional changes a little quicker because it's, they just have more control over what they're doing versus the hitters. But I just think it's important to establish, some trust in the relationship first, not to say that we're not going to tell them the truth and what we think. That's another thing that I feel is a kind of a competitive advantage is being very honest with players. So, but yeah, that would be the gist of, we're not going to chop block them right away with what they're doing wrong. We're gonna make them know we're on the same team first.
Is that a little different with some of the high school picks? Not about anybody specifically, but some of the high school picks, like you said, they're going to be in the Bridge League for a little while here. Do you feel like there are opportunities to make, whether they're, you can define it, major or minor adjustments to swing, defense, setup, pre-pitch, any of that kind of stuff defensively too, where you have that because the Bridge League is set up the way it is, you do have that kind of control and kind of, hands-on, boots on ground kind of thing?
Yeah. And again, it'll mean something different for the high school guys and the college guys, honestly. But Bridge Camp does facilitate that. Like we get to see them play a lot. We're around them a bunch for the first time. And yeah, it does give us the opportunity. I would still tell you, like we're diagnosing a little bit of who they are and what they are. And, in particular, the high school guys, like we're trying to make sure they're getting to the field on time right now and all of that kind of stuff. So it's, you talk about becoming a professional. There's some other things involved, but yeah, we will use this 6 weeks. And then, I think the best way to describe it is we'll use a lot of that information that we get to try to develop a really clean, productive off-season program for them to go home and execute. And then, we'll get most of these guys back in January in preparation for spring training, which at that point to me is really like it's go time of let's start making sure that we've executed the off-season plan. We're in good shape physically and mentally for that matter, and kind of go at it.
I don't want to make you speak for the whole front office, but I have to imagine that as we sit here, you and I talking on what is this, August 6th, right? We're a few days past the deadline. The draft is done. A lot of promotions either will be or have been handed out to players, as the draft guys come in and go out to their affiliates and whatnot, like we've been talking about. Do you guys feel like there's an opportunity here to exhale for a brief moment? I mean, it's just the work has been so extensive here the last few weeks for every front office in baseball. And I'm wondering if there's just this little bit of time where y'all get to go, okay, let's watch this for a little bit. Did you see the home run that Colson Montgomery hit in Seattle the other night? Good God, it went 900 feet. And then go do your next couple of things.
Yeah, I will say, and I've actually had some conversations with some of our staff about not doing that. So we, when we say like it's not for everybody, I think it's important. First of all, number one, I give a lot of our young guys and our staff and the major league staff a ton of credit because we are seeing the fruits of some labor with some young players getting to the big leagues, getting their feet on the ground. Obviously, everybody, we talk a lot about Colson, but there's other guys, Chase and Kyle Teal and Caro and Brooks Baldwin. And there's other guys that, Tim Elko and Brian Ramos are in AAA. Like there's more stuff coming, but so that's great. That being said, I think that we do have to be very intentional about staying vigilant and relentless. So when you ask the question, do we take a break? I say, yeah, a little bit, but all that means is we kind of go back to normalcy of grinding in the time of the year that's not the draft and the deadline. But look, man, you gotta think lucky to be lucky a little bit. And, we've had some good fortune and hopefully we'll continue to do so. But the processes that we try to implement are constantly changing because we're trying to make them better, but we do feel good about them. And we're just trying to keep putting one foot in front of the other, man.
So what's next on the list? Or I guess last year as we get to like the last 6 to 8 weeks of the season, right? Like from your standpoint, do you start going back through some of the, I don't know, the wish list items where you're like, hey man, if we can get this guy to AAA by the end of the season, we're feeling, on his own, not like you're pushing a guy, right?
Sure,
but
yeah.
like he gets here on his own merits. We feel really good about this. Or this guy, makes a 10% dip in his walk or increase in his walk rate or strikeout rate. Like, are those the kind of things that you kind of look back through and like follow here the next 6 weeks? What is, the next steps that's outside of business as usual for you?
Yeah, it is. I mean, there's definitely reflection. There's constant feedback, right? Like we try to, part of our, aspiration this year was to incorporate really good feedback for the players on a daily basis, right? And so whether that's, catchers reports, whether that's hitters reports, pitchers reports, all of the stuff so that they know exactly what they're doing. And, after a game, if a hitter took a close pitch, like he gets a report that tells him whether or not that ball was a ball or a strike, right? So like those kinds of things. But in terms of, for us as a staff, for sure, we're reflecting at this point in the year, like there's a lot of rubber on the road talking about the full season affiliates, and not to say that the season's over by any means. Charlotte plays through September 21st, right? So hopefully we're going to be watching Birmingham play in the playoffs again. So we're not by any means done, but I think it is a good point in the season to take some, how guys have done up to this point, and then take into consideration the impact that, a promotion to the next level will have on them, obviously this year, but really maybe more importantly going into next year.
Are there opportunities here now to also look at some of the players who, thought they might be at the next level and say, hey, you got a chance to do X, Y, and Z here with the rest of your season, to put that carrot out in front of a guy who may have struggled some over the last 6 to 8 weeks?
Yeah, 100%. And that means maybe something different in different levels. But even, if we're talking about AA and AAA, things happen fast is what we tell the guys, right? And, you can be upset all you want. Nobody's going to feel bad for you. Or you can get hot for a couple weeks and be the guy in the conversation to go to the big leagues if somebody if they have a need, And so that, to me, that's the carrot. The carrot is, we really try to do a good job of having players show up and play good every day, because that's what we do, in our organization. And but it is a results business, a production business, and so we do take into account that it's August 6th, like you said. It's hot, guys are tired, and they've been grinding. But to me, this is where a player can really show us kind of like who he is, and where we can gain ground on other organizations that are, talking about the weather, and, we just want to score more runs than you.
When you look at the pitching on the White Sox prospect side of things, I know a lot of people, including myself, are asking questions about workloads as we get to this point of the year. You've mentioned a number of times that there's a real individualized approach to players, and I think that makes all the sense in the world. But there's got to be some sort of organizational philosophy on innings increases, on how much you want a guy to pitch late in the season. I'm thinking of Tanner McDougal specifically here, only to paint a picture. And we don't have to talk about his plan specifically or overarching. That'd be great too. Tanner hasn't had a start go over 3 innings in the last 4 outings. Obviously, that's by design. What can be gained and what can still be learned by a guy like McDougal or like somebody else who's having his innings tapered as you get to the latter part of the season? I mean, this is a guy that was, for White Sox fans now who haven't clued in on Tanner McDougal, I mean, this guy was going 6, striking out 11 and walking 1. Like a month ago, he was just unhittable at AA. So there's an adjustment for him here.
Yeah, and Tanner's a good example because he's had such a good year. Up to this point, he's had as good a year as anybody in the organization, right? And the innings limit thing is individualized, and I'll point to, just because everybody will appreciate the 𝗵𝗀 situation last year, where I gave a lot of credit to our performance department, the sports science department, for really tracking, like, despite the fact that was as many innings as he's ever thrown, all of the peripherals were good, strength, recovery, etc. So there was very good, data for us to look upon and say, look, he can keep going, kind of thing. Now, Garrett's also, computer generated, right? He's enormous, big, strong, and all the stuff. So like, I don't think he's not the example you can set for everybody, but like, on our side, Tanner McDougal's 21 years old, right? So he's he is just getting going. And so we take that into consideration, when we're looking at that stuff. And honestly, with a guy like Tanner, we hope he pitches in the big league sooner than later. So what our thought process with him specifically, and most of the guys is look, we may limit the innings, but we want them to pitch the entire season. So like when you see that he's only going to pitch 3 innings per start right now, that's really indicative of, look, but we want him to make all the starts. We want him to pitch to the end of the season. So in order to do that, we do have to taper the innings, and hopefully, knock on wood, he's going to stay healthy throughout the year and finish strong, because he's done everything we've asked of him. I give him a ton of credit. I give our staff a ton of credit for continuing to kind of, promote the things that he needs to do, but he's done a good job. And honestly, like, if you're looking at the Birmingham pitching staff, there's a bunch of guys we could point to there that have had just, arguably career years for some of them.
Yeah, Zach Franklin, who just got promoted to AAA Charlotte, is a ton of fun to watch. I was just watching some tape there. He's got his leg kick that gets out horizontal and then just kind of does this little flip thing, and then he delivers. Like, he's just been great and a huge part of that Barons thing too. From a big picture development standpoint, I've been wondering this for a little while, and the White Sox are a team like many that have this question to answer. What goes into, whether it's the scouting or the dev of it all, like, at some point you have to answer, can this player X stay at shortstop? It's one of the biggest questions that has to be answered for any organization. Can this prospect, the top guy, whether it's Colson or Caleb or Billy or whoever it is, can he play short at the big league level? How do you go about evaluating that? What's on the checklist that you need to see in order to say yes to those guys?
Yeah, and I think I go back to, there's one thing to preface it with, is that you got to remember they can get better, right? And so like that's number one. Now there is a skill set that playing shortstop at the major league level is a special thing. Like, the guys that do it and that do it well are unique, right? And so there's objective data that we have access to in terms of like first step quickness and range, et cetera, that we definitely take into consideration, and that helps us on the surface. The next thing I would say is that there's some intangible to that position. I think that if you look around the league and you look around at the guy at the really good teams, in most cases that position is one of leadership as well. And so there's more than just than what meets the eye, is what I would say. But like from an athletic skill set standpoint, I do think that there's some things that you have to be able to do to play that position every day at the major league level. And we can talk about arm strength, we can talk about range, we can talk about internal clock. Some of those kinds of things definitely play into it. But and Colson is a good example. He's playing as good defensively, and we've talked about him being solid defensively, but like, he's playing as good defensively at the major league level as we saw him play, in the last year and a half. And so there's some of that too that you got to remember. Like, the switch flips a little bit when guys get to the big leagues, and so you do have to expect them to add a little bit on top at times, especially for the guys. And I would call Colson one of these guys, the guys that we think have the ability to be really special players.
Paul, appreciate it as always. I know you guys have just finished a crucible here of 3-4 weeks. Thanks so much for coming on. Looking forward to talking to you again next time.
Connor, thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for watching. Big thanks to Paul Yiannis. We've got another episode coming out 2 weeks from now where we will talk to 2 different outstanding minor league players in the White Sox organization and the baseball that they've been playing. Thanks again. We'll check you next time on Road to the Rate.